If you're waiting for control to announce itself, you're already inside it. Real control doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't threaten. It repeats quietly, consistently, until resistance feels irrational and obedience feels like common sense. That's the part most people never see. Ancient systems understood something modern people forgot. The fastest way to control behavior is not persuasion, it's symbol compression. Symbols don't debate you. They replace the need to think. They collapse entire worldviews into a single shape, sound, or number. Once that happens, behavior follows automatically. Not because people are stupid, because the system is efficient. And when responses are trained below conscious awareness, control doesn't feel like control. It feels like reality. This is Obsidian Record. This channel does not analyze people. It does not chase headlines. It does not participate in surface-level debate. We investigate systems, the ones that shape belief, behavior, hierarchy, and power across time. If you're here to feel validated, leave now. If you're here to understand how influence actually works, stay. Because here is the uncomfortable truth most people never confront. You do not live in a free society. You live inside a symbol network. And most of what you believe, want, fear, and defend was installed long before you chose it. Before we go further, notice something. If that sentence triggered defensiveness, that's not emotion, that's conditioning. Now let's ask the question most people avoid because it destabilizes them. When you look at your daily life, how many of your decisions are truly decisions? Not the dramatic ones, the quiet ones. What you wear, what you trust, what you respect, what you assume is normal, what you assume is impossible. How much of that is chosen and how much of it is preloaded? Because modern systems don't control people with force. They control people with categories, and categories begin with symbols. A symbol is not decoration. A symbol is a shortcut for meaning. It allows the brain to skip evaluation and move straight to response. That sounds harmless until you understand the consequence. If meaning is accepted instantly, the entity that defines meaning controls behavior, and the modern world is built entirely on behavior management. Most people think they're thinking. They're mostly recognizing a logo, recognizing a uniform, recognizing a credential, recognizing a flag, recognizing a title, recognizing a number, and then responding exactly how they were trained to respond. Let's make this personal. When you see a police uniform, your body reacts before your mind does. Posture shifts, tone adjusts, breathing changes. You might distrust the individual, but you still respond to the symbol. That mechanism is ancient. Priesthoods didn't rely on personal credibility. They relied on robes. Respect the garment, and the person inside it becomes irrelevant. Now, expand that logic. When you see a luxury brand, what happens? You assign value without testing utility, status without verifying competence, intelligence without evidence, all from a symbol. This is not consumer culture. This is conditioning. Modern systems train you to treat symbols as reality markers. And once symbols define reality, truth becomes flexible. You stop asking, is it true? And start asking, does it look legitimate? That's the pivot. This is why modern control doesn't censor information. It controls frames. It controls interpretation. You can drown in facts and still be completely managed. Because facts don't govern behavior, meaning does. So, here's the first destabilizing question. How many of your beliefs came from investigation, and how many came from repetition? Normal is the strongest spell in any society. Not because it's mystical, because it's constant. Ancient gods were not spiritual abstractions. They were governance infrastructure. They justified hierarchy. They stabilized obedience. They preserved continuity. But gods had a weakness. They were visible. Visible authority can be blamed, questioned, overthrown, so power evolved, not away from gods, but into something more resilient. Law is godhood without personality. A king can be hated, a priest can be doubted, but the law is framed as neutral, impersonal, inevitable. That's the breakthrough. Once authority becomes impersonal, resistance becomes incoherent. Who are you resisting? A person or reality itself? This transition, repeated across civilizations. I am divine. I represent the divine. I represent the law. I represent the institution. Institutions are the final form because they outlive individuals. Now watch what happens to symbols during this evolution. Early systems used explicit symbols, statues, temples, sacred geometry, royal seals. Later systems refined them. Stone became paper. Carvings became stamps. Rituals became documents. Then numbers replaced everything. Account IDs, credit scores, license, ratings, metrics. This is not progress, it's compression. The system makes obedience easier by making identity measurable. And measurement is control, because what gets measured gets managed. And whoever defines the metrics decides what matters. Here's the question most people don't like answering. What part of your life is not measured? Productivity, income, education, health, location, social reach, influence. This is not paranoia, it's design. Same, ancient logic, new interface, control the records, control reality. Ancient priests controlled meaning, calendars, rituals, purity, worth. Modern people assume that world is gone. It isn't. It was upgraded. Banks define value. Media defines reality. Education defines legitimacy. Law defines permission. None of these require belief. They require procedure, which makes them stronger. Belief can collapse. Procedure persists. So, when you hear, the gods became law, understand the function. Authority moved from myth to mechanism. And symbols are the connective tissue. Money is not value. It's permission. A number on a screen is not wealth. It's access. And if access is controlled, belief becomes irrelevant. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. How free are you? If your survival depends on symbols you don't control, your job is symbols. Your rent is symbols. Your insurance is symbols. Your identity is symbols. Your status is symbols. And you're trained to treat all of it as natural law. That is not a conspiracy. That is structural evolution. Most people think the problem is misinformation. That's shallow. The real issue is that verification has been outsourced. People don't test reality. They check legitimacy, a brand, a credential, a consensus, a checkmark, a rating. Those are symbols. Sometimes they point to truth. Sometimes they point to power. But here's the part people resist. A system doesn't need you to believe a lie. It only needs you to feel uncertain. Uncertainty creates dependence. Dependence creates submission. Sophisticated control doesn't block information. It saturates the environment. Endless commentary, endless outrage, endless debate, not to inform you, to exhaust you. Exhaustion is obedience. Tired people don't challenge structure. They adapt. So ask yourself, how many of your beliefs are conclusions, and how many are exhaustion positions? Beliefs adopted because you ran out of energy? That's not knowledge, that's containment. The most powerful symbols aren't ancient, they're invisible. Forms, interfaces, dashboards, scores, policies. A checkbox is not a box. It's a gate. A terms and conditions screen is not legal protection. It's ritual. You scroll. You agree. You proceed. You don't read it. You perform it. That's ritual behavior. If the ancient world were designing obedience today, it wouldn't build temples, it would build interfaces. So ask yourself, how many times per day do you perform rituals you don't believe in just to pass through gates? How often do you say, I agree, without agreement? That's obedience without belief. That's the final form. Control doesn't need to hide. It needs to feel normal. In the next section, we're tracing the full pipeline, from sacred symbols to state rituals to legal doctrine to banking architecture to modern identity systems, not as theory, as function. Because once you see function operating in real time, the noise stops working, not because you're calmer, because you're no longer confused. If this made you uncomfortable, good. That's the point. This isn't background content. It's a system study, and it builds in layers. Before we continue, notice something. You're already participating. You didn't click this because you were searching for it. You're here because it crossed your path. That distinction matters more than people realize. Systems don't wait for consent. They work through exposure. So pause for a second and do something revealing. Not for visibility, not for metrics. Comment in the comment section where you're watching from, city or country, not to prove reach, to expose something most people never consider. Systems only work when they scale, and scale only happens when repetition crosses borders. If this were contained, it wouldn't matter. The fact that it isn't is the point. And now we go deeper. When people hear the phrase, gods became law, they imagine metaphor, a poetic way to say society matured, outgrew superstition, became rational. That interpretation is comfortable. It's also wrong. What actually happened was not philosophical. It was functional. Gods were never just spiritual figures. They were structural tools. They justified hierarchy. They created moral gravity. They stabilized obedience. They made authority feel inevitable. But gods had a scaling problem. Belief is unstable. Belief varies. Belief invites debate. Large systems do not scale on debate. So power adapted. It didn't abandon the function. It changed the interface. Religion was the upgrade. Religion standardized gods into systems, calendars, codes, rituals, texts, and the moment religion becomes institutional, it stops being personal. It becomes administrative. This is where priesthoods eclipse kings. A king rules bodies. A priesthood rules meaning. Kings rule generations. Priesthoods rule centuries because they control interpretation. What a symbol means, what a text means, what an event means, what justice means. Meaning is leverage. You don't need to control facts if you control interpretation. That was the first transition. The second is more important. Religion does not stay spiritual. It becomes legal, not because people lost faith, because law is religion without mystery. Law defines right and wrong. Law defines punishment. Law defines belonging. Law defines exclusion. But law has an advantage. Religion doesn't. Law does not require belief. It requires compliance. So the system evolves again, from worship the god to perform the ritual to obey the law. Each step removes inner agreement. Each step increases scalability. That's why modern systems don't care what you believe. They care what you do. If you want to see where ancient symbol power becomes modern governance, look at the seal. Not decoration, not tradition, concentrated authority. In ancient Mesopotamia, cylinder seals were not art. They were identity, permission, ownership, legal validation. A document without a seal was nothing. This is why seals were guarded. Control the seal, and you control legitimacy. Now follow the evolution. Seals become stamps. Stamps become signatures. Signatures become credentials. Credentials become verified identity. Same function, make reality official. And once reality is official, it becomes enforceable. Here's the question people don't like answering. How much of your life exists only because a system recognizes it? Your job, your education, your legal status, your credit, your eligibility, your access. If a policy update can erase your access, you are not independent. You are conditional. That's not motivation. That's structure. Religion didn't just provide meaning, it solved a governance problem. It synchronized calendars, standardized narratives, defined moral categories. Most importantly, it internalized supervision. Force is external. Religion is internal. Religion trains people to monitor themselves. That's its value. Once supervision is internal, enforcement can be reduced. Low enforcement, high compliance. That's the dream of every control system. Now observe modern life. People assume religion disappeared. It didn't. Its functions were redistributed. Media became moral authority. Politics became ritual identity. Brands became tribal markers. Education became legitimacy filtering. Same functions, different interfaces, and symbols didn't disappear. They multiplied. Ancient symbols were obvious. Temples, statues, inscriptions, garments. Modern symbols are everywhere too. You just don't call them symbols. Interfaces, scores, labels, certificates, policies. The system trained you to see these as neutral. Neutrality is the disguise. Power that announces itself is resisted. Power that looks procedural is obeyed. So think carefully. When you click, I agree, you perform a ritual. When you submit an application, you perform a ritual. When you wait for approval, you perform a ritual. Not spiritual rituals, compliance rituals. They train patience, they train submission, they train dependence, and repetition turns behavior into instinct. Familiarity becomes acceptance. Acceptance becomes obedience. That's not accidental. That's design. Ancient priesthoods controlled truth through access. Who could read? Who could interpret? Who could speak with authority? Modern systems use a different method. They control attention. They don't hide information. They flood the environment. What you don't notice can't threaten structure. What you do notice can be framed. Framing is modern ritual instruction. It tells you what to fear, what to dismiss, what to defend, what to worship. Most people think manipulation is lying. That's amateur control. Advanced control creates exhaustion. Truth and falsehood collide constantly until verification feels impossible. So people outsource certainty to brands, to platforms, to credentials, to consensus symbols. Sometimes those symbols point to truth. Sometimes they point to power. The mistake is assuming they exist for your benefit. Many exist to manage behavior. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. When was the last time you verified something important without using authority as a shortcut? Not experts say, not credible source. Actually verified. Most people can't. Not because they're incapable, because verification has been made expensive. A population that cannot verify becomes dependent. Dependent populations are predictable. Predictability is leverage. Confusion isn't a failure of the system. It's profitable. Now we connect what most people keep separate: religion and banking. This isn't conspiracy. It's continuity. Ancient temples were financial institutions. They stored surplus, issued credit, recorded debt, enforced obligation through moral framing. Debt wasn't just economic, it was sacred. Sacred obligation is stronger than force. Now look at modern finance. Good credit, bad credit, responsible, risky. These are moral judgments wearing numerical masks. Once behavior is measured, it can be shaped. The function of modern finance is not freedom, it's predictability. Credit controls time. What you can do next year, next decade, next lifetime. People bound by timelines behave consistently. Consistent behavior is manageable. This is why systems prefer obligation over cash. Cash exits the grid, obligation tightens it. That's how scale works. Now, the sequence becomes clear. Gods created authority. Religion standardized it. Law mechanized it. Banking operationalized it. Identity systems digitized it. At every stage, emotion was removed and function was refined. The system stopped looking like domination, and that made it stronger. People resist tyrants. They rarely resist procedures, but procedures can restrict life just as effectively. The difference is psychological. Force feels like control. Procedure feels like reality. So consider this carefully. If access were removed tomorrow, what part of your capacity would remain? Mobility, options, leverage. If those depend on validation, you are not autonomous. You are permitted, and permission can be withdrawn. That's why ancient systems obsessed over records. Records create reality. Modern systems didn't abandon that principle. They perfected it. In the next section, we move into the most dangerous layer. The symbols you don't recognize as symbols because they're presented as common sense. We'll break down why repetition creates belief, how exposure replaces persuasion, how people are trained to defend their own limits, not as theory, as diagnosis. Because clarity isn't comforting, it's destabilizing. And once you see the system clearly, you can't unsee it. Now we reach the part most people never expect. Because nothing here looks ancient. No temples, no statues, no priest robes. And yet, the structure is identical. This is the point where the symbol system stops sounding like history and starts sounding like your daily routine, which is why people resist it, not because it's complex, because it's close. The most effective symbols are the ones you don't recognize as symbols. Because recognition creates distance. Distance creates doubt. Doubt creates choice. So modern systems don't present symbols as sacred. They present them as obvious. Of course, that's how it works. That's just reality. That's just the way things are. Those are not neutral phrases. They are conditioning endpoints. Ancient priests told people what the gods demanded. Modern systems tell people what reality demands, and reality is harder to argue with than gods. So here's the move. Replace belief with common sense. Replace ritual with procedure. Replace obedience with normal. Same function, cleaner disguise. Now we start where people least expect control to be hiding. Education. Education is presented as neutral, objective, a path to opportunity. Structurally, it functions as a symbol filter. It decides what counts as knowledge, what counts as intelligence, what counts as legitimacy, and most importantly, who gets certified as allowed to speak. Credentials are modern talismans. They don't prove truth. They signal permission. Once someone has permission, their words carry weight. Once someone lacks permission, their words get ignored, even if they're accurate. This is not about intelligence, it's about authorization. So here's the question people avoid because it exposes them. How often do you evaluate an idea on its merit? And how often do you evaluate it based on who is allowed to say it? That is symbolic authority operating in real time. Most people assume media controls through persuasion. It doesn't. It controls through repetition. Ancient rituals worked because they repeated the same movements and phrases until they felt natural. Modern media does the same thing, just faster. Headlines repeat frames. Images repeat emotional cues. Language repeats assumptions. You are not being convinced. You are being habituated. After enough exposure, certain reactions become automatic. Certain topics trigger anger. Certain phrases trigger fear. Certain symbols trigger trust. And you mistake those reactions for your opinions. That's why outrage cycles never end. Outrage is a ritual. It synchronizes attention, it narrows thought, it drains energy. An exhausted population does not investigate structure. It reacts to surface conflict and calls it awareness. So do something that will annoy your conditioning. Next time you feel a spike of emotion online, ask, was this information or was this a stimulus? If it was stimulus, it was built to produce a predictable response. Predictable responses are manageable. Manageable populations are governable. Pause here for a second. In one word, answer this in the comments. What emotion do you feel most often when consuming news or social media? Fear, anger, hopelessness, superiority, urgency. Just one word, not to vent, to reveal the pattern. Patterns become visible when people stop performing. Ancient tribes rallied around symbols, totems, banners, colors, marks of belonging. Modern people do the same thing and call it preference. Brand loyalty is not rational, it is tribal. You don't just buy a product, you signal identity. I am this kind of person. I belong to this group. I am not one of them. That is ancient behavior. Corporations understand this better than most governments. That's why brands don't sell utility. They sell meaning, status, rebellion, virtue, belonging. Once identity is tied to consumption, control becomes subtle. You police yourself. You defend the brand. You internalize the narrative. You attack threats to the symbol, just like devotees defended their gods. Except now the god is a logo. So ask the uncomfortable version of the question. How many of your preferences are actually identities? And how many identities were marketed to you before you chose them? Ancient temples guided behavior through architecture. Where you walked, where you stood, where you looked. Modern interfaces do the same thing. Buttons, notifications, scroll mechanics, infinite feeds. These are not conveniences. They are behavioral funnels. They decide what you see, when you see it, how long you stay, when you feel urgency. Every interface is ritual space. You enter, you perform actions, you receive feedback, you repeat. Over time, your attention is shaped, and attention is the most valuable resource in any system, because what you attend to shapes what you believe, and what you believe shapes how you behave. This is why modern systems compete for attention, not loyalty. Loyalty requires belief. Attention requires habit. Habit is stronger. Here is the part people recoil from. The system does not need you to believe falsehoods. It needs you to distrust your own judgment. Once you distrust yourself, you outsource truth to experts, to institutions, to consensus, to platforms. Sometimes that outsourcing is reasonable. Sometimes it is exploited. The danger isn't misinformation. The danger is epistemic dependence. If you cannot tell what is true without permission, you are governable. Truth becomes whatever the symbol system validates. That's why debates feel endless. They're not designed to resolve. They're designed to occupy. While attention is occupied, structure stays untouched. So ask yourself a question that cuts cleaner than opinions. When was the last time you changed a belief because of direct experience, not because authority reframed it? If the answer is rarely, that's not a personal failure. That's an engineered environment. If this is landing, you already understand something most people don't. This isn't content, it's mapping. Obsidian record isn't here to entertain your attention span. It's here to expose the system that trains it. And for the full frameworks that don't belong in public feeds, the newsletter goes deeper. Ancient systems feared chaos. Modern systems fear deviation. Deviation exposes structure. That's why normal is enforced so aggressively, not through violence, through social cost, mockery, exclusion, labeling. If you step outside the accepted frame, you don't get debated. You get categorized. Once categorized, you can be dismissed without engagement. This keeps most people inside invisible boundaries. They don't obey because they're forced. They obey because deviation feels expensive. That is obedience without chains. That is the system functioning perfectly. In the final part, we step back and connect everything. Ancient symbols, modern systems, belief, obedience, wealth, identity. And then we ask the question most people avoid because it's destabilizing. If control works by shaping perception, not force, what actually weakens it? Not rebellion, not outrage. Something quieter. Something that systems built on predictability can't tolerate. Because it doesn't fight the machine, it stops feeding it. Now we arrive at the point most systems hope you never reach. Not because it's dramatic, because it's destabilizing. Up to now, we've traced the full migration of power, from gods to religion, from religion to law, from law to banking, from banking to identity, from identity to routine. We've shown how symbols shape behavior, how repetition replaces belief, how procedure replaces force, which leaves the question no system answers publicly. If control works by shaping perception, not violence, what actually weakens it? Not rebellion. Rebellion is loud. Rebellion is emotional. Rebellion is predictable. Predictable responses strengthen systems, not outrage. Outrage burns energy without changing structure. The real answer is quieter, and that's why it's dangerous. Ancient scribes understood something modern people rarely consider. Control does not collapse when people resist. It collapses when people stop reacting automatically. Every system of power depends on speed. Speed of response. Speed of compliance. Speed of emotional reaction. The faster you react, the easier you are to model. The easier you are to model, the easier you are to manage. This is why modern life is built around urgency, notifications, deadlines, breaking news, artificial scarcity, manufactured emergencies. Urgency eliminates reflection. Reflection creates distance. Distance creates choice. And choice is disruptive. Ancient systems used ritual to eliminate pause. Modern systems use tempo. Everything pushes immediacy. Now, respond, decide, agree, react. So, the first thing that weakens control is delay, not procrastination. Delay with awareness. The ability to pause before responding to a stimulus. That pause breaks the ritual. And once a ritual is broken, it becomes visible. Visibility weakens power. This is why systems distrust people who don't react on schedule. They get labeled inefficient, uncooperative, disruptive, non-compliant. Those aren't neutral descriptions. They are warnings. They signal unpredictability. And unpredictability is the enemy of control. The system does not fear rebels. It fears non-participants. Rebels fight the system. Non-participants confuse it. A rebel confirms the system exists. A non-participant questions its necessity. Ancient empires didn't fear heretics as much as they feared quiet withdrawal, because belief fuels ritual, and ritual fuels obedience. That's why the most punished behavior, historically, was not opposition. It was refusal. Refusal to kneel. Refusal to chant. Refusal to perform. Participation keeps systems alive. Now translate that into modern life. The system does not need you to love it. It needs you to participate predictably, work on schedule, consume on cue, react to headlines, argue within approved boundaries. Most people do this unconsciously. They call it living. So ask yourself something uncomfortable. Which parts of your daily life feel mandatory, even though no one is directly forcing you? Those are ritual points. Pause here for a second. In one sentence, answer this in the comments. Where do you feel rushed to react instead of allowed to think? No explanation. Just name it. Patterns matter more than stories. This section makes people defensive. That's a signal. Systems prefer obedient, good people over corrupt, bad ones. Because good people self-regulate. They follow rules because it feels right. They comply because they want to be responsible. They defend structure because they believe it protects stability. That's why morality is useful to power. Not because morality is false, but because morality can be instrumentalized. Ancient religions did this openly. Modern systems do it quietly. Compliance becomes virtue. Questioning becomes irresponsibility. Deviation becomes danger. So, ask yourself this carefully. How often do you avoid questioning something, not because it's illogical, but because it feels socially wrong? That feeling didn't appear naturally. It was trained. Symbols only work when they are not seen as tools. The moment you recognize a symbol as a mechanism, it weakens. That's why systems discourage meta-thinking, thinking about thinking, questioning frames, examining assumptions. They prefer opinions, arguments, debates. Arguments keep people inside the arena. Meta-thinking steps outside it. Once outside, something becomes obvious. Most conflicts are not about truth. They are about boundary maintenance. Which ideas are allowed? Which questions are permitted? Which conclusions are safe? And those boundaries are enforced socially, not violently. Mockery replaces punishment. Labels replace chains. Algorithms replace guards. This is why awareness spreads slowly. It isn't exciting. It doesn't offer certainty. It removes it. And uncertainty terrifies people who rely on systems for meaning. The final evolution of control is self-maintenance. A system that convinces people to defend it voluntarily, not because it's flawless, because they can't imagine life without it. That's the deepest cage. Not one you're locked into, one you protect. But every system built on predictability has a flaw. It assumes tomorrow will resemble yesterday. Awareness breaks that assumption. When individuals begin to notice their triggers, their routines, their automatic responses, their symbolic dependencies, they slow down. And when enough people slow down, leverage erodes. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, gradually. Which is why it never makes headlines. Headlines are rituals too. If you've stayed until now, understand this. This channel is not here to tell you what to believe. It exists to show you what is shaping belief. Obsidian Record studies power as structure, not conspiracy. Systems, not villains. Patterns, not personalities. If this gave language to things you've sensed but couldn't name, subscribe. Not for frequency, for continuity. Share this with someone who is reacting to the world without seeing the frame. And for the full breakdowns that don't belong in public feeds, the newsletter goes deeper. The most effective control is the one you don't recognize as control. And the first step out of it is noticing the pattern. Nothing you're about to hear is history. This isn't ancient. This isn't symbolic in the abstract. This isn't something that used to happen. These mechanisms are active, operational, automated, running quietly through your daily life. If the previous topics showed how symbols shape obedience, this one shows where that architecture lives now. Because control didn't disappear, it went underground. This is Obsidian Record. We don't analyze personalities. We don't chase headlines. We don't react. We study systems, structures that shape behavior, belief, wealth, and power without asking for permission and without announcing themselves. If you're new here, understand this immediately. This channel is not designed for casual viewing. Each episode compounds. Miss something early, and you won't notice it immediately. You'll feel it later. And for the full frameworks that don't belong in public feeds, the Obsidian Record newsletter exists for a reason. Now, we begin with the most dangerous idea modern society accepts without question. that reality is neutral. Reality is not neutral. Most people believe reality simply exists, that the world they experience is the natural outcome of events, randomness, progress, or human nature. That belief is the first vulnerability. Reality is not fabricated in a cartoonish way. It is curated through structure. What you see, what you don't see, what feels possible, what feels absurd, what feels dangerous, what feels inevitable. These are not personal conclusions. They are environmental effects. Ancient power worked by shaping belief directly. Modern power shapes environments, and environments shape behavior without argument. Put a person in a narrow hallway, they walk forward. Put them in an open field, they choose direction. Choice depends on architecture. Modern architecture isn't physical, it's informational, and that's where we start. Time is an invisible cage. Your day is not natural. Your schedule is imposed. Work hours, deadlines, weekends, fiscal quarters, billing cycles. These are not neutral measurements. They synchronize behavior. Ancient calendars did the same thing. They told people when to plant, when to harvest, when to worship, when to rest, when to obey. Modern calendars don't mention gods. They don't need to. They tell you when to wake, when to work, when to spend, when to rest, when to panic. Time is the first invisible architecture. If you control time, you control movement. If you control movement, you control outcomes. So ask yourself this: how much of your life runs on time structures you did not design? And how often do you feel behind? Something you never consciously agreed to chase. That feeling is not personal failure, it's architectural pressure. The architecture of attention. Ancient systems controlled attention through ritual. Modern systems control attention through fragmentation. Your attention isn't stolen, it's split. Notifications, feeds, alerts, urgency loops. Each interruption feels minor. The effect is not. Fragmented attention produces shallow thinking. Shallow thinking produces reliance on authority. Reliance produces obedience. This is not accidental. A population that cannot sustain attention cannot challenge structure. That's why long-form thinking feels exhausting. Not because you're incapable, because your environment is training it out of you. Now sit with this. When was the last time you focused on one idea without interruption for more than 30 minutes? If that question feels uncomfortable, good, because attention is power, and power has moved upstream. If this already feels different from what you normally watch, subscribe now. Obsidian Record exists for people who want to understand why the world feels disorienting instead of just reacting to it. And share this now, not because it's viral, because most people never encounter material that explains structure instead of symptoms. Now we go deeper. Information is not content. It is environment. Most people think information is content, articles, videos, posts, opinions. That's surface-level thinking. Information is environment. It sets the emotional climate you live inside. Fear-heavy environments produce compliance. Confusion-heavy environments produce dependence. Overstimulated environments produce passivity. Ancient rulers needed priests to maintain belief environments. Modern systems outsource that work to platforms. Algorithms don't need to lie. They need to prioritize. What appears first feels important. What appears often feels true. What never appears feels irrelevant. That's how reality is shaped without censorship. Nothing is removed. It's buried. And buried truths don't spark revolutions. They produce fatigue. So ask yourself something revealing. What topics feel impossible to fully understand, no matter how much content exists? Those are not failures of intelligence. They are engineered complexity zones. Complexity paralyzes action, and paralysis is useful. Ancient societies had priests. Modern societies have experts. Experts are not inherently bad, but structurally, they serve the same role. They interpret reality for the masses. The danger appears when interpretation replaces verification. Most people no longer ask, "Is this true?" They ask, "Who says it's true?" That shift is subtle, and once it happens, authority becomes portable. Whoever controls expert legitimacy controls belief. Credentials become symbols. Panels replace priest councils. White papers replace sacred texts. Consensus replaces doctrine. Dissent isn't punished violently. It's dismissed professionally. That's how control matures. Pause here real quick. In the comments, answer this honestly. What part of modern life feels the most overwhelming or confusing to you, even though you're told it's normal? One phrase, no explanation. Patterns reveal structure. The architecture you never see. The most important systems are invisible because they feel obvious. Banking interfaces, employment platforms, identity verification, compliance procedures, risk scoring, each one quietly narrows behavior, not with threats, with friction. Inconvenience shapes behavior better than force. Because people adapt, they don't resist. This is why modern power looks boring, procedural, administrative, bureaucratic. But boredom is camouflage. The most dangerous structures are the ones you don't feel at all, because you live inside them. In the next part, we're going to map this architecture directly, not philosophically, practically. We'll break down how identity systems replaced citizenship, how risk models replaced judgment, how efficiency replaced autonomy, and why freedom now feels abstract instead of lived. Because once you see the architecture, you stop blaming yourself for feeling constrained, and that changes everything. You don't move through the world as a person anymore. You move through it as a profile. Most people never notice the moment this happened because it didn't arrive with force. It arrived with convenience. Forms, accounts, applications, dashboards, quiet systems that promised efficiency and delivered control. Modern power doesn't manage citizens. It manages records. And once you understand that, a lot of confusion disappears. Ancient systems cared about names. Names carried lineage, reputation, context. Modern systems care about identifiers. An identifier is not personal. It is functional. Once identity becomes functional, it becomes manageable. You are no longer a person inside the system. You are a record, and records can be evaluated, ranked, approved, delayed, denied, erased, not dramatically, administratively. This isn't dystopian fiction. This is daily life. You apply, you wait, you're reviewed, you're approved or rejected, rarely explained, rarely challenged, because the system doesn't say no aggressively. It says, not yet, not eligible, not qualified. Soft denials are powerful. They don't provoke resistance. They train patience, and patience trains obedience. Ancient systems judged behavior morally. Modern systems evaluate behavior statistically. This is presented as progress. In many ways, it is, but it has consequences. Risk models don't care why you acted. They care how likely you are to act again. Intent disappears, context disappears, human complexity disappears. You are reduced to probability. And once you are a probability, the system doesn't negotiate with you. It adjusts access. Higher risk means fewer options. Lower risk means smoother passage. Most people never see the model evaluating them. They only feel the friction. This is why modern control feels impersonal. Because it is. No one is punishing you. The model is calibrating you, and you're expected to calibrate yourself in return. Permission used to be explicit. You asked a ruler, a priest, an authority figure. Now permission is embedded. You don't ask, you submit data. The system responds. You don't argue, you comply. This applies everywhere. Work, travel, finance, speech, visibility. The more areas of life require validation, the more predictable behavior becomes. People stop asking, is this right? They start asking, will this be approved? That shift is subtle, and once it happens, internal authority collapses. Judgment is replaced by outcome optimization. Quick pause for a second. In the comments, answer this honestly. Where in your life do you feel evaluated, not understood? One area only, no explanation. Recognition is enough. Efficiency is sold as virtue. Faster systems, smoother processes, less friction. But friction is where choice lives. Ancient systems understood this balance. Too much friction causes rebellion. Too little friction causes compliance. Modern systems optimize for compliance. When everything is efficient, deviation becomes expensive, not morally, practically. If deviation means delays, denials, or complications, most people won't do it. Not because they agree, because it's inconvenient. This is control without coercion. Inconvenience replaces force. This is how systems train you to self-censor. Ancient rulers punished speech openly. Modern systems don't need to. They let patterns do the work. Visibility becomes risky. Silence becomes safe. Not because anyone ordered you to be quiet, because you noticed outcomes. Who gets promoted? Who gets flagged? Who gets removed? Who gets ignored? People adapt quickly. They adjust tone. They adjust language. They adjust curiosity. Not consciously, instinctively. This is obedience through anticipation. The system doesn't act first. You do. If you're still here, subscribe now. This isn't content you consume once. It's material you come back to when the world stops making sense. And share this right away, not to argue, to expose structure. Most people don't resist control because they can't see it. And that's the shift you were never told about. Societies talk about rights. Quietly, systems move to access. You don't lose rights loudly. You lose access quietly. Access to platforms, access to services, access to opportunity, access to movement. No declaration, no announcement, just friction. Resistance becomes difficult because there's nothing to confront. A policy, an algorithm, an update. No face, no center. That's intentional. This is why people defend the system that limits them. This is the part people resist emotionally. So slow down. People defend systems that limit them because the system defines survival. When income, identity, safety, and future are tied to a structure, attacking that structure feels like self-destruction, so the mind stabilizes. It's necessary. It's for safety. It could be worse. That's just how things are. These aren't arguments. They're psychological shock absorbers. Ancient religion used faith. Modern systems use rationalization. Different language, same function. The most important question so far. Ask yourself this without rushing. If the system disappeared tomorrow, what skills, relationships, or capacities would still function? That answer reveals dependency. Dependence isn't weakness, but unexamined dependence is leverage, and leverage is power. Next, we move into the most volatile layer, emotion. We'll examine how emotional triggers are engineered, how choice is guided, not free, how narratives divide without resolving, and why constant conflict benefits structure. Because once identity is categorized, emotion becomes the steering wheel. And that's where control stops being administrative and becomes psychological. By now, something should be impossible to ignore. Modern control doesn't require agreement. It requires predictability, and predictability is not produced by logic. It's produced by emotion. Ancient systems used fear sparingly. Fear is unstable. It creates backlash. It burns energy too fast. Modern systems prefer something quieter. Emotional oscillation, hope, fear, outrage, relief. Repeat. This cycle keeps people engaged without ever becoming grounded. And grounded people are dangerous because grounded people pause, and pausing breaks conditioning. Now, look at the emotional texture of modern life. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels important. Nothing ever resolves. That is not accidental. Resolution creates closure. Closure frees attention. Systems that depend on attention avoid closure. So conflict is sustained, not solved. Most people believe they're free because they have options. Options are not freedom. Option design is control. Ancient rulers limited paths. Modern systems multiply them. You can choose which platform, which brand, which ideology, which narrative, but the underlying structure remains untouched. This creates the illusion of agency. You feel active, you feel expressive, you feel involved, but you're moving inside a pre-designed corridor. So, ask the question most people avoid. How many of your choices change outcomes, and how many only change appearance? Choice without leverage is decoration. Ancient myths explain the world. Modern narratives contain it. They tell you who is good, who is bad, what can be questioned, what must not be examined. Narratives simplify complexity. That sounds helpful, but simplification also removes agency. Once a narrative is accepted, thought becomes automatic. You stop asking, what's happening structurally? You start asking, which side am I on? Sides are efficient. They divide populations horizontally, so no one looks vertically. This is why modern conflict never ends. It isn't designed to resolve, it's designed to occupy. Pause here for a moment. In the comments, answer this honestly. What topic immediately forces people to choose sides instead of asking better questions? One topic, no explanation. Recognition is enough. Conflict consumes energy. Energy that could be used for investigation, coordination, system-level questioning. A population in conflict is busy. Busy people don't redesign systems. They react. This is why modern life feels loud but stagnant. Endless debate, minimal structural change. That's not dysfunction, that's design. Ancient scribes documented this clearly. Conflict below stabilizes power above. Words are not neutral. Ancient systems guarded vocabulary. Modern systems flood it. New terms, new labels, new definitions, not to clarify, to destabilize meaning. When language shifts faster than understanding, people cling to symbols. Labels replace explanation. Once labeled, a person or idea no longer needs to be understood. It can be dismissed. This reduces cognitive load. Reduced cognitive load feels like relief. Relief is addictive, so people defend the language that limits them because it feels easier. This part is personal. Modern fatigue isn't just physical, it's cognitive. You are required to interpret constantly, react constantly, decide constantly, signal constantly, but you are rarely allowed to stop. Stillness feels risky. Silence looks like disengagement. Disengagement looks like failure. So people stay in motion. Motion without direction, which is ideal for systems. A moving population that never leaves the field. Control today isn't about obedience. It's about occupation. Busy reacting, busy signaling, busy surviving. A busy mind never zooms out. A zoomed out mind is dangerous. So ask yourself this carefully. What would happen if you stopped reacting for 1 week? Not withdrawing, not disappearing, just observing. Most people can't, not because they're weak, because the environment punishes stillness. In this final section, we step outside the system, not to escape it, to identify where it fails. Because every structure has a limit, and once you see the limit, pressure stops feeling like destiny. Every system relies on assumptions. Assumptions about behavior, timing, emotion, reaction, compliance. As long as those assumptions hold, the system feels permanent. When they don't, it starts making mistakes. Ancient scribes understood this. That's why they obsessed over routine. Routine creates expectation. Expectation creates predictability. Predictability enables planning. Modern systems work the same way. Algorithms assume patterns. Institutions assume participation. Models assume continuity. The moment behavior shifts quietly, the system lags. Lag is vulnerability. This irritates people, but it matters. Rebellion is noisy. Noise draws attention. Attention triggers response. Response reinforces structure. Ancient revolts failed this way. They removed rulers. The system adapted. Modern outrage cycles do the same thing. They burn energy. They confirm the frame. They change nothing fundamental. This is why systems tolerate dissent. Dissent inside the arena is harmless. What systems struggle with is loss of predictability. Control works best when it feels natural. When people believe, this is normal, this is necessary, this is inevitable, the moment those beliefs weaken, behavior changes. Not dramatically, subtly. People hesitate. They delay reaction. They question defaults. This doesn't look like resistance. It looks like confusion. And confusion is dangerous to systems, because confused people stop acting automatically. Automatic action is the fuel. Pause here. In one word, answer this in the comments. Where do you operate on autopilot the most? Work, money, news, social interaction, consumption. One word. Recognition comes before change. Awareness doesn't feel empowering. It removes certainty. It removes shortcuts. It removes villains. Once you see structure, you stop saying, they're doing this to us. You start asking, why does this system reproduce itself? That question removes emotional anchors. Many people prefer villains. Villains make suffering feel meaningful. Structure makes suffering systemic. That's harder to tolerate. Modern control requires speed, fast reactions, fast compliance, fast outrage, fast adaptation. Slow people break systems, not because they're smarter, because they're harder to model. Delay introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty breaks prediction. Broken prediction breaks leverage. This is why urgency is everywhere. Act now. Decide now. Respond now. Urgency is not neutral. It is a control mechanism. The counter pattern is not disappearing, rejecting everything, refusing participation, becoming hostile, chasing purity. Those are emotional responses, and emotional responses are predictable. The counter pattern is cognitive, the ability to slow reaction, question framing, separate structure from narrative, distinguish permission from capability. This doesn't make life easier. It makes it clearer, and clarity alters behavior quietly. Most people won't adopt this perspective, not because they can't, because it destabilizes identity. If you stop reacting automatically, you may have to admit, some beliefs were installed, some goals were inherited, some fears were conditioned. That's uncomfortable. So people retreat into certainty. Certainty feels safe, even when it isn't. Let's connect the entire arc. God's created authority. Religion, standardized belief. Law, mechanized obedience. Banking, operationalized obligation. Modern systems, digitized identity. At each stage, authority became calmer, while emotion was pushed into the population. People feel anxiety, urgency, outrage, fear. The system remains quiet. That is the final inversion. Obsidian record does not tell you what to believe. It shows you how systems think, how power reproduces, how obedience becomes invisible, how perception is shaped before choice appears. Seeing structure restores leverage, not dominance, leverage, and leverage changes outcomes. If you stayed until now, thank you. This wasn't light content. It wasn't meant to reassure you. It was meant to orient you. Subscribe to the channel, not for frequency, for continuity. Share this with someone who feels trapped but can't explain why. And for the full frameworks that don't belong in public feeds, the Obsidian Record newsletter goes deeper. The most effective control is the one you never notice. And the first sign it's weakening is when you stop reacting on command. Nothing you are about to hear is symbolic. Nothing here is metaphor. These descriptions come directly from the earliest recorded systems of control. The tablets do not speak in abstractions. They speak in procedures. What they describe is not belief management. It is behavior management. And by now, that distinction should feel familiar. Previously, we reached the point where control breaks down, not through resistance, but through loss of predictability. Now we begin where the tablets themselves become explicit. Not about gods, not about kings, about measurement. Because the moment power learned how to measure people, it no longer needed to persuade them. The earliest tablets do not describe people as souls. They describe them as quantities, rations, labor units, workdays, debts, credits. Names appear rarely. Functions appear constantly. This is not accidental. The tablets reveal a shift from moral judgment to numerical assessment. Early authority cared about obedience. Later authority cared about output. How much grain was delivered? How many days were worked? How much land was cultivated? How much debt remained? The tablets record people the way modern systems record activity, not who you are, but what you produce. This is the origin of something modern people mistake for neutrality, measurement. Once behavior is measurable, it becomes adjustable. Once it becomes adjustable, it becomes controllable. No violence required. One detail appears again and again in the records. The tablets never ask why something happened. They only record that it did. Flood destroyed crops, yield dropped, rations reduced, worker injured, output slowed, replacement assigned. Intent does not appear. Context does not appear. Only consequence. This is not cruelty. It is efficiency. The tablets show the moment systems stopped judging behavior and started optimizing it. Modern systems did not invent this. They perfected it. Risk scores, performance metrics, productivity dashboards. Same logic, cleaner interface. When systems stop asking why, people learn to stop explaining themselves. They adapt instead. The tablets are obsessed with debt, not as punishment, as structure. Debt appears before prisons, before standing armies, before formal law. Because debt does something force cannot. It extends control into the future. A person in debt does not need to be watched constantly. They self-regulate. They plan around obligation. They adjust behavior preemptively. They avoid risk. The tablets show debt used to shape planting cycles, labor commitments, marriage arrangements, migration. Debt was not economic. It was temporal. It controlled what you could do next season, next year, next generation. Modern finance did not invent this. It digitized it. Another pattern appears repeatedly. Idle time is treated as danger. The tablets record strict schedules, work rotations, festival limits, rest periods controlled from above. Unstructured time created unpredictability. Predictability was safety. Safety was stability. This is why ancient systems regulated calendars so tightly. Time was not personal. Time was administrative. Modern systems inherited this perfectly. Calendars, shifts, deadlines, productivity cycles. A person with no idle time has no space to question structure. The tablets understood this thousands of years ago. One of the most important moments in the tablets is the shift from memory to record. Before records, authority had to be present. After records, authority could be absent and still function. The record replaced the ruler. Once something was written, it became reality. Disputes ended at the tablet, not because it was true, because it was recorded. This is the birth of bureaucratic power. The tablet does not argue. The tablet does not negotiate. The tablet simply exists. Modern databases are not new power. They are ancient power at scale. Pause here. In one sentence, consider this for yourself. Where in your life does a record matter more than your explanation? Do not answer publicly if you don't want to. Recognition is enough. Early symbols represented gods. Later symbols represented authority. The tablets show the transition clearly. Seals replace faces. Marks replace voices. Records replace memory. The symbol no longer points upward to the divine. It points inward to the system. At this point, control no longer depends on belief, only compliance. This is the moment power becomes quiet. No speeches, no threats, just procedure. And procedure feels like reality. This is the detail modern readers miss. The tablets do not discuss freedom. They discuss order. Freedom was irrelevant to systems designed for continuity. What mattered was stability, predictability, yield. Freedom creates variance. Variance disrupts planning. So the tablets solved variance by narrowing options, not violently, administratively. Modern people live inside the same solution. Near the end of several tablet sequences, a warning appears, not to the people, to the administrators. When measurement becomes total, the system begins to mistake numbers for reality. When numbers replace judgment completely, blindness sets in. The tablet's record collapse is caused not by rebellion, but by over-optimization. Too efficient, too rigid, too certain. Systems failed because they stopped seeing humans and only saw metrics. This is not philosophy. It is recorded failure. Modern systems believe they have solved this problem. They have not. They have only accelerated it. The faster the system moves, the less tolerance it has for variance. The less tolerance for variance, the more fragile it becomes. This is the contradiction at the heart of modern control, and it is the opening. The tablets do not end with collapse. They end with adaptation. Power does not disappear when a system fails. It reconfigures. We examine the last instruction hidden in the tablets, not about resistance, not about escape, about where systems cannot see. Because every structure, no matter how total, has a blind spot. And once you understand the blind spot, control no longer feels permanent. By this point, something should feel unsettled, not emotionally, structurally. The tablets are no longer describing power as authority. They are describing power as sequence, not who commands, not who obeys, but what happens first, what follows, and what becomes automatic. This is where control stops looking like management and starts looking like inevitability. The later tablets introduce a subtle shift. Earlier records focused on totals, amounts stored, debts owed, labor delivered. Later records focus on order. First this, then this must follow. Planting before irrigation, work before ration, ration before rest. The tablets stop asking whether something should happen. They only record when it must happen. This is the origin of behavioral sequencing. Once behavior is placed into sequence, choice becomes timing, not direction. You may act, but only at the appointed moment. Modern systems did not invent this. They refined it. Force produces resistance. Sequence produces compliance. The tablets show this clearly. When tasks are ordered correctly, people comply without instruction. When rewards follow immediately, behavior stabilizes. When consequences are delayed, obedience becomes internal. This is not psychology. It is logistics. A person following a sequence does not feel controlled. They feel busy. One of the most important discoveries in the tablets is the management of anticipation. Rations are delayed deliberately. Festivals are scheduled far apart. Relief follows long labor cycles. Why? Because anticipation shapes behavior more reliably than punishment. A person anticipating relief will endure more than one being threatened. The tablets record entire populations guided by delayed reward. Modern systems call this incentive alignment. Ancient systems called it order. Same function, different language. Waiting appears everywhere in the tablets. Waiting for allocation, waiting for approval, waiting for reassignment. Waiting creates submission without confrontation. A waiting person does not rebel. They hope. Hope stabilizes systems. This is why waiting is never explained. It is normalized. Modern cues are not inconveniences. They are behavioral regulators. The tablets understood this perfectly. Another shift appears in the records. Movement becomes conditional. Workers move when assigned. Merchants travel when cleared. Families relocate when permitted. Unscheduled movement is recorded as disruption. The tablets are not concerned with freedom of movement. They are concerned with predictable flow. Once movement requires permission, identity becomes locational. Where you are determines what you may do next. Modern systems inherited this entirely. Let's pause here for a second. Ask yourself quietly, where in your life does progress require approval before action? Recognition is enough. The tablets reveal a moment where commands disappear. Not because authority weakened, because it became unnecessary. Routine replaced instruction. Once people internalized the sequence, authority could withdraw. This is the birth of self-regulating populations. No guards required, no speeches required, only habit. Modern systems aim for the same result, a critical detail. When something goes wrong, the tablets do not describe defiance. They describe deviation. Deviation from schedule, deviation from quota, deviation from expected behavior. This reframing matters. Disobedience implies will. Deviation implies error. Once behavior is framed as error, correction feels neutral. Modern systems use this constantly. In the final layers of the tablets, something new appears. Projection, expected yield, expected labor, expected compliance. The system begins acting on future behavior, not past action. This is the true turning point. When systems act on prediction, they stop reacting to people and start shaping them. Modern predictive systems are not unprecedented. They are ancient logic accelerated. Here is the paradox the tablets quietly reveal. The more a system depends on prediction, the less it tolerates unpredictability. Small deviations create cascading failure. The tablets' record collapses, not caused by rebellion, but by unaccounted variance. Droughts ignored, human fatigue misjudged, local knowledge overridden by model. This is not moral critique, it is operational record. Near the end of several tablet sequences, a strange pattern appears. Administrators begin writing more, people are mentioned less, records become denser, reality becomes thinner. This is the first appearance of the blind spot. When systems trust records more than observation, they lose situational awareness. The tablet becomes the world. Modern systems face the same risk. This matters. The tablets never describe perfect order. They describe constant adjustment. Control is never complete. It is maintained. This implies something critical. If control must be maintained, it can fail. The tablets do not celebrate power. They warn about its limits. Hidden in administrative notes, a recurring instruction appears. Observe without interference. This is written for administrators, not subjects. Why? Because interference alters behavior. Observation preserves truth. This instruction is rarely followed. Systems prefer intervention, and that is where the weakness emerges. By the end of these tablets, power stops expanding. It stabilizes, and stabilization creates rigidity. The tablets do not tell people how to overthrow systems. They tell administrators how systems fail. Next is where the final pattern becomes visible. Not rebellion, not collapse, but where systems cannot observe themselves. Because the moment a system cannot see its own impact, it begins operating on assumption, and assumption is where power breaks. This will not offer solutions. It will expose the boundary, where prediction ends, where control loses grip, where behavior becomes opaque. That is the final instruction the tablets leave behind, where control ends. By now, the arc should be complete, not emotionally, structurally, from gods to law, from law to debt, from debt to records, from records to sequence, from sequence to prediction. The tablets do not tell a story of tyranny. They document a process, and every process, no matter how refined, has a boundary. This is not about breaking systems. It is about identifying where they stop working. All systems rely on assumptions. Assumptions about behavior, about timing, about response, about continuity. The tablets make this explicit. Administrators plan harvests before planting, rations before labor, outcomes before action. Prediction becomes the foundation. Once prediction works, systems expand. Once expansion stabilizes, prediction hardens. This is where the vulnerability appears. A system that predicts must assume sameness. Tomorrow must resemble yesterday. That assumption is never spoken, but it is everywhere. The tablets never celebrate perfection. They warn against it. In several late records, a recurring phrase appears. Conditions diverged. Not rebellion, not defiance, divergence. Weather changed. People moved differently. Energy declined. Motivation shifted. The system did not fail because it was resisted. It failed because reality stopped matching the model. This is the quiet truth modern systems avoid. The tablets describe a moment administrators feared most, when records outpaced observation, when reports replaced presence, when decisions were made from summaries, not experience. This is where systems lose vision. They see numbers. They miss context. They see averages. They miss anomalies. They see compliance. They miss exhaustion. The tablet becomes reality, and reality, unobserved, changes. A critical detail appears near the end of the records. The system tracks action well. It tracks production, movement, transaction, response. It does not track stillness. Stillness produces no data, no signal, no metric. From the system's perspective, stillness is absence. But absence is not resistance. It is opacity. Prediction works only under motion, under repetition, under speed, under reaction. The tablets show this clearly. When people follow sequence, systems function. When people pause, systems hesitate. When hesitation spreads quietly, models lag. Lag introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty breaks leverage. This is not collapse. It is drift. And drift is where control loses precision. This matters. The tablets do not instruct people to fight systems. They instruct administrators to observe. Why? Because reaction feeds structure. Stillness starves it. Rebellion confirms the system's relevance. Non-reaction questions it. This is why rebellion appears nowhere in the records as a solution. It is predictable. Systems absorb it. Near the end of the tablets, a final directive appears. It is brief. It is unemotional. It is written for those managing power. Do not assume continuity. That is the warning. Because the moment a system assumes behavior will remain the same, it stops adapting. And the moment adaptation stops, control weakens. Not visibly, not dramatically, quietly. This series was not about exposing villains. It was not about promoting resistance. It was about showing structure, how control evolved, how obedience became procedural, how behavior became predictable, and where predictability fails, not through force, through awareness and pause. When you see structure, you stop personalizing pressure. You stop assuming confusion is failure. You stop mistaking urgency for necessity. You begin to recognize when something is designed to move you rather than serve you. That recognition does not free you. It reorients you, and orientation changes behavior naturally. This concludes the arc. There is nothing more to escalate, only patterns to notice. Thank you for watching all the way through. This was not casual content, and it was not designed for speed. If you found value in this series, I hope you subscribed for future work. Obsidian Record will continue to study systems, not personalities, structures, not headlines. Thank you for giving this your attention. The most effective control is the one you never notice, and the quietest change is the one that lasts.